Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of 781 News Debrief. I am your host, Jamie Kirkelly, and I'm joined by Josh Kastorf
Hello, everyone.
and Kristen Mackin.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me today.
We had a lot of business as usual this month, but a lot of it was centered around the MBT Communities Act and the Fernald, also with some stuff related to a library, which Christine is going to be talking about. A bunch of applications for Moody Street, like tables and chairs in the streets from various businesses along Moody Street. Christine, do you want to take it away?
Yeah, thanks. So I attended 2 meetings recently and wanted to give the community an update on what I learned. The first was a meeting about the project for the 12820 interchange. This is a massive traffic project that has been in the planning stages since before COVID hit, so has been going on for quite some time. This is related to the 1265 Main business development, which includes the Market Basket Plaza, which a lot of folks are familiar with. That parcel of land is zoned for considerable additional development, but in order to unlock that development potential, the developer has been asked to do significant traffic changes, improvements in the nearby area. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and walk folks through what I learned at a meeting with the 1265 Main folks. So what I have here is a photograph of the display that they had up. To the right of my screen is northbound traffic, and to the top is west. So this region in the bottom part of the photo is the Cedarwood neighborhood, and I'm just going to see if I can highlight directly on this. Sweet, there we go. So down here is Cedarwood. Right now, the existing condition is that there's basically 2 on-ramps onto 128 northbound. One is this green streak that runs behind Livingstone Lane. That, if you're coming out of Cedarwood, you would immediately merge to the right to get onto northbound traffic. The other is this existing ramp over here, that if you're coming from Weston or another point, you would be picking up that ramp and getting onto the northbound traffic. So what the 1265 Main folks have done is they've created a new design that eliminates the onbound traffic lane behind Livingstone Lane. That's why it's gone from being black for pavement to green. And luckily, I think deservedly, the folks on Livingstone Lane are going to finally get a noise barrier. And in addition, that lane of traffic is going away. They're also going to be adding stoplights. Those 3 S's on the interchange are going to be new stoplights created at 3 points around this construction. On top of that, they're also adding a new connector along Green Street. Right now, if you go over the 117 bridge and take an immediate left, you kind of dead end into a construction area. That's going to be extended all the way down till it connects with Route 20 at this interchange. So the 3 new stoplights are going to be placed at the point where just past the current turnoff is to get onto 128 northbound. So there's going to be a stoplight if you're coming from Cedarwood almost right away. Then you'll go over the bridge. There will be a second stoplight to control the traffic that's coming southbound off of Green Street. Then travel will continue around the Rotary in this direction until you hit another stoplight at this place, where the northbound traffic coming off the highway sort of enters that 2-lane with a barrier in between to go east into Waltham past Cedarwood. What that means for folks who want to get on 128 northbound, which was my commute pre-pandemic, is instead of coming past Cedarwood and immediately taking a right onto the highway, you're going to pass through 2 stop signs, the one here and the one here. Continue 3/4 of the way around the existing interchange and then use the existing on-ramp to get northbound. You'll bypass that 3rd stoplight because it'll be a slip lane that goes directly onto the highway. This is going to eliminate a bunch of potential conflict zones that traffic could be crashing into each other for folks who are maybe less good at rotaries or less familiar with the area or driving in the dark. And it's also going to accommodate a considerable increase in traffic flow from that Green Street section of the project. So the next photo I'm going to show is the 117 bridge project, which is related to this whole piece of construction. Once again, the north direction is to the right of the photo here. This is a much more straightforward diagram, and I'm not going to highlight anything because what's happening is the bridge is going to remain in the exact same place that it currently sits. There's going to be 2 stoplights. They're going to widen it, add some infrastructure for pedestrians to cross the road. They're going to be dead-ending Stowe Street, which the folks on Stowe Street have been asking for 10 or 20 years. And then what you're seeing at the top of the picture here is that new Green Street connector that's going to go connect to that other massive interchange. So all of that work is going to create, ideally, a much easier flow of traffic through that whole area. And that's what allows the 1265 Main folks to go ahead with their next phase of development. So when I was on the city council, this project was in some percentage of design. I don't remember what percent is. The new update is that the project is now 100% design, which means they are complete with the designing phase and has been submitted to the Massachusetts Department of Transportation. That's MassDOT. If MassDOT approves it, construction on this project could start as soon as September of this year, September 2024. Once that project starts, they anticipate there's going to be 2 years worth of construction, so it would reach completion by September 2026. The replacement of the 117 bridge, they're still intending to do the quick replacement, which is basically you build a second bridge elsewhere and then bring it in on a giant rolling platform. And over the course of a weekend, you cut the old bridge, slide it out of the way, slide the new bridge into place so that there's no disruption to the traffic during the weekday commuting time periods. There would probably be a weekend where it is shut down. I don't know where it falls in the timeline of this project, but I do know that 1265 has committed to notifying the community in advance of that construction taking place. So that's the update of this pretty massive traffic project. And I'm going to pause here to see if Jamie or Josh have any questions and to stop sharing my screen.
I was going to ask if there was any word on where the monorail is going to fit into this.
There is no monorail that 1265 Main is participating in. And okay. It might conflict with the bridges, but that does remind me, something I didn't mention is the plan for the cyclists. I know that the rail trail currently passes over 128 along a disused trestle bridge for the railroad. The current proposal has not been designed. It is at 0% design, but the current proposal is to use that trestle bridge that exists right now and have an at-grade crossing of the new Green Street connector and an at-grade crossing of Route 117 in Waltham. A lot of cyclists and pedestrians prefer what's called a flyover bridge that would pick up on the north side of Main Street and go all the way over all of those bridges and the highway and plop right down in Weston where the existing rail trail connects. So the Department of Conservation and Recreation at the state, Mass DCR, is, I think, bidding for the design phase of that project. So it's not in a planning phase yet, but it is in a phase where if folks wanted to advocate for that infrastructure, you should be going ahead and contacting your city councilors, your state representatives to say, we want a flyover bridge and not an at-grade crossing, if that's something that's important to you.
Seems like it makes sense. And honestly, like adding the extra stoplights is kind of like adds an extra step to getting on the highway there, but like that area has so many accidents. Like it seems like at least something had to get done. That's probably a good thing.
Yeah. Yes. And removal of that secondary on-ramp, I know, has not historically been popular with the folks in Cedarwood because it extends them going 3/4 of the way around that rotary. But the reality is that the state and federal highway department doesn't like having 2 on-ramps that close together because then you have speeding traffic. You're both trying to merge and there's not space and they conflict with each other. So that will hopefully also increase the safety through that whole interchange and also in that immediate section of the highway.
I'm excited about the bike crossing. That's going to be really cool when that happens. In some of the documents about MBTA Communities Act that Tom was telling us about earlier this year, there was reference to a future multimodal transport hub there. Is that part of this plan, or is that a completely future possible thing?
That's a completely separate future possible thing. There was no mention of a multimodal hub as part of this project. I think it's a good idea. I am in favor of it, but it's not part of the current 2-year construction plan.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess moving along, did you want to cover the library renovation?
Yeah,
Was in City
absolutely.
Council this year? City Council
Yes.
this week, rather? Month. Was in City Council
Right.
this month.
So the library recently held a series of community input meetings to talk about a possible renovation that they are considering. And I attended the last of these input meetings. However, they still have a survey open on the library website that you can go fill out if you're interested in contributing to the ideas phase of the renovation. And they also noted at the meeting I attended that there's been no architecture engaged. There's no design at all for this. So it's still wide open for community input into what you'd like to see from the future of the Waltham Public Library. So the situation right now is the front part of the building, which is the section that faces Main Street, is a historic building. And then if you walk through the building, right before you get to the bathrooms, there's usually a big table with a book display on it. That's the new part of the building. And I am air quoting new because I learned at the meeting I attended that that was completed in 1994, which makes it 30 years old this year. They've graduated college. Maybe they've bought a house if they're lucky. The library has children. And basically, shortly after it was finished, technology started to change really quickly, and they have found that that portion of the library is no longer serving the needs of the community. So, like I said, the design at this point is wide open. The meeting that I attended, folks were asking about adding more charging outlets, more internet connectivity, as kind of a basic list of asks. Also, they would like to have more bathrooms. There are 2 single-person bathrooms in the library, and I learned at this meeting that those are serving 60 to 80 people an hour between the 2 of them. So an incredible need for more bathrooms, more space for a lot of the programming that the library is doing. Folks at the meeting I attended were asking for meeting rooms of larger and smaller sizes, maybe meeting rooms with built-in AV connections. There's the library is interested in having a language lab, which would have more computers, more cables, more connectivity. There's the possibility to expand the makerspace, maybe add some new equipment to the makerspace. And I've been using the makerspace a lot recently. I absolutely love it. Strongly recommend go check it out if you haven't already. So the plan right now, yay, makerspace. Where the library is at right now is they're applying to the Massachusetts Department of Library Commissioners for a grant that would fund 40 to 50% of the costs of this proposed renovation. The Friends of the Waltham Public Library has committed to do a fundraising campaign for an additional $1 million. And then there may be a need for an additional community-based capital campaign, depending on the scope of the project and the total costs once they get into the design phase. They do not have a timeline for any of this construction yet. So like I said, lots of possibility for folks to still get involved and speak up and be part of the design and planning process. When this renovation happens, it is likely that the current library will be completely closed for 2 years. At that point, they'd be shifting over to using their new bookmobile that the city council recently approved. So having a mobile library in the city, and they would like to have a secondary smaller location to offer some of the same services that they have right now. So the downside is there would be less library services for 2 years, but the upside would be at the end of it, we have a brand newly designed library with hopefully all of our hopes and dreams stuffed into that new building.
It's a shame to lose the access when they do finally start the renovations. It'll be, because I use those meeting spaces a fair amount.
I use the meeting spaces too. I was interviewing for a job over the winter and I use the meeting spaces a lot to do interviews because they're a nice blank wall and I knew I wasn't going to be interrupted. And the library provides so many valuable services for the community And it's unfortunate that there's not a renovate in place possibility. But like I said, the upside is that they have the potential to dramatically expand the services at the end of the project.
This would also fix like the ongoing issue with the AC that they've been having.
Yes, it would. That was very high on the wish list is, or the need list is a new HVAC system.
I was following I think it was in finance or long-term debt, one of the two, because they had to someone come in to get the money for doing the AC repair or the AC this year, and everyone was grilling him about the cost of that, in addition to the fact that they had this other line item coming through. So the at least it's not having to spend the same amount of money year over year and actually fixing the problem.
Right. Yes.
And would be nice if there were more than 2 bathrooms.
Yes.
It's like it's always funny when like every so often you'll get down there and just be like a line of people waiting.
Yeah, I have waited in line for the bathrooms in Waltham, and I've often visited other libraries, and they have something that looks more like a high school bathroom where there's like a double wall and you walk around and there's multiple stalls. And we need that, frankly.
Yeah.
We need that in Waltham. We're serving so many people. The meeting I was at also had on the proposed ideas to have a lactation room, which would be awesome for available to the public. Sensory rooms for folks who have different needs. I think that would be great. I asked if we could have a lounge area to read our books, or maybe even attach a coffee shop. I think that would be sweet. But like I said, the library does have their survey open. So if folks have more ideas you want to send over to our wonderful library director who facilitated the meeting, I know she and the rest of the team will love to hear the ideas. And I think we can pop a link to that in the show notes and maybe circulate it on social media as well, so that folks don't have to go searching for it. They can just click the link from one of our platforms.
Yep, we'll add that to the notes. Moving on. So Josh, do you want to talk Fernald for a bit?
Yes. Thank you, Christine.
Yeah,
thanks for good to see you
Christine.
back here. And I'm happy to be back here to give an update on the Fernald, because there's a lot that's been going on. It seemed like maybe this story was over at last December when the city council voted to fund the recreational plan, but a lot has happened since then. I'm going to share my screen. Yeah, so a lot has happened since then. There was the input session in March that you know about, hopefully from our last debrief, because Jamie talked about it then, but there were over 100 people there. And then on April 11th, there were 2 major news articles that came out about the Fernald. The GBH News had a story about the various concerns that people have brought up about the plans for the property, and one local person who's a family member of a disabled person said she was enraged by the way that this has been handled. So that was in the headline, Waltham community enraged by the plans. The same day, was a Boston Globe article revealing that for several years, the Massachusetts State Police were storing evidence, including physical evidence, including rape kits and things like vials of blood from criminal cases at the Fernald site. And then when the state left the Fernald site, they left it behind. And these were cases that involve people who are still alive. So this is a pretty major mishandling of criminal evidence. And so most of the story was focused on the state police and why did they have this there in the first place, and why did they not take it with them, and what's going to happen now. Some of the story did focus a little on the city, though, because they were discussing why did it take so long for something to be done about it. So according to the Globe, Brian Parsival, who was part of the team that did the recordation of the site, who was hired by the city to do that he first found these in just late 2015. And he reported it to Alex Green, who was the head of the historical commission at the time. And Alex Green reported it to several city officials, including Mayor McCarthy. Apparently it was in an email with other Fernald related stuff, and her response was nothing can be done without the city council and mayor's approval. So it's not clear what happened immediately after that, but the stuff was still there. In late 2016, Alex Green did a walkthrough with the Waltham police, and then the Waltham police help get in touch with the state police and then convince them to come take the stuff. And in fact, the first time they came, they didn't take everything. The Waltham police had to follow up to get them to finish the job. And so the stuff was not removed until April 2017 when it was first reported in December 2015. And it's not clear why. And when the Globe asked Mayor McCarthy why, she said, quote, steps were taken on more than one occasion, the specifics of which would have to be researched. Not a lot of detail there, but it definitely raises some questions. You know, I've seen some comments online like this was clearly the state's responsibility. It had nothing to do with Waltham, but it also, you know, how people respond when they initially hear about a wrong that's being done, you know, tells you something about them and what their priorities are. So that's interesting. And then there's also Fernald related stuff happening in the Conservation Commission. So in March, there was a meeting where Phil Mosier, who was the chair of the commission, discussed concerns of that there could be a violation of wetlands rules in the construction that's currently going on at 190 Trapello Road. And he gave a presentation, you can find the whole thing on the city website, which started off with sort of an interesting explanation about how they use maps. And so there are maps that can be used that a developer can look at to see if something is a possible wetland. And if there's a possibility of that you're going to be building within or doing any kind of alteration within 100 feet of a wetland, then you need to send a notice of intent to the Conservation Commission, and that's in their jurisdiction. That doesn't mean you can't build. Basically, from there, you work out, well, first, they make the determination, is it a wetland or not? And they usually do that with a site visit. And you can also, there are specific things you can look for to determine if it's a wetland. And so the final determination of whether it's legally considered a wetland is a vote of the Conservation Commission. And then they work with the developer and they, you know, they can potentially allow them to build very close to the wetland if they're convinced that they're doing the right things to mitigate the damage that it's going to cause. So they work it out from there. But what happened with the Fernald was last year there was a site visit when the Conservation Commission was considering a different part of the recreational plan. And that was the part that was supposed to have a golf chipping range that was fairly close to a wetland. And the Conservation Commission ended up approving it with a bunch of conditions. And since then, it appears that the Recreation Department has just dropped that part of the plan and decided to move ahead on this other part instead. So during a site visit last year, when they were there to talk about the chipping range, according to Phil Mosier, he said to the project engineer, hey, I just want to remind you over at this other part near 190 Trapello, there's also possible wetland, you know, that has to be checked out. You need to file a notice of intent. And he remembers the engineer saying he had a wetlands consultant who had come previously and he would bring him back to take another look at it. But there was no notice of intent filed, and the city just went ahead and started construction. This is the feature that Mr. Mosier was concerned about. It appears to be either a drainage ditch or a stream. And I'll come back to that in a moment. Mr. Mosier was upset when the construction started because that's very unusual. Generally, you don't want to take any risk. A developer doesn't want to take any risk with not going through the Conservation Commission if it might be their jurisdiction, because in theory, at least, the Conservation Commission can, if you go ahead and build and then it turns out it is a wetland, you're in violation, and they can do things like oppose $1,000 a day fine. And I believe in some cases they can not only stop the construction, but make you rebuild it how it was and put back the wetland. So generally, a developer is not interested in skipping that step if there's any chance that it might be jurisdictional. So he contacted several city officials to say this is not right, that construction is started without you consulting with the Conservation Commission, and that led to a very contentious email thread, which I haven't seen, but it was referenced in these meetings, where someone, it wasn't clear who, claimed that Mr. Mosier had told the project engineer during this last year's site visit that it was not a wetland, and he was accused of flip-flopping on his opinion about whether it's a wetland. And he says that's not true. But even if it was true, that's not how you make the determination. The Conservation Commission has to vote on it. It's not just, you know, a discussion people have during a site visit that's not documented. However, the city opted not to stop construction over this concern because they said that a wetlands consultant hired by the engineer had determined it was not a wetland. So it wasn't in the Conservation Commission's jurisdiction. Oh, that's from the site visit. Let me move up. Here's what I'm looking for. So this is, so they sent Mr. Mosier a report from a consultant. And this was odd because the report was dated March of this year, but he hadn't seen it since February. So he came, February is when he was there to look at something else. And he didn't go back and look at the spot again. He said, oh yeah, I looked at that while I was there, and here's why I don't think it's a wetland. So that's unusual. And so that, so in the March meeting, the Conservation Commission voted to hire a peer reviewer, a second consultant, to go in and decide, you know, what is this true or not? And they said, if it's not a wetland, there's no problem. So that's how it was left. So yeah, so in the April meeting, the recreation director was there, the project engineer, and also this consultant. And first of all, this had been discussed offline between meetings, and the Conservation Commission had asked to do a site visit, and they'd been told no, they can't be on the site. So Mr. Dufermont, who's been on the commission about 7 years, made a kind of very sort of impassioned argument why they should be allowed on the site, and the recreation director said no, you're not allowed on the site because it's not in your jurisdiction. And that was repeated, I think, 3 times. So he kind of gave her 3 opportunities to, and she wouldn't allow them on the site. She would, however, allow their peer reviewer on the site. And I'll go back to that in a minute, but let's take a look at this clip, because I think it's really interesting to see the response. And I like the way Mr. Dufermont explains the Conservation Commission's role also.
Are you open to the commission doing a site inspection on this site? Because we've been stopped from going on or somehow or another, and before you came before us tonight. And we have a question. I mean, we are a Conservation Commission. We follow the laws. And if we go on site and we don't find anything, or nothing is found, then the issue's dead. But, you know, we try to do the best we can for the city and for the contractor who's doing the work and so forth. That building, I know, was removed. The parking lot was removed. But, you know, all of a sudden, there were tractors and everything there, bulldozers, and everybody's tearing up everything without even talking to us. And we do an awful lot of work on the Fernald School. As you know, there's a lot of water there. And we try to protect the water, not the buildings, not anything else. We're only concerned about water, and that's our specialty. And are you willing, or your company willing, to let us come and do a site inspection and see what we haven't seen?
With all due respect, Mr. Shamil is an expert in his field, and when we were doing the design process, he deemed that a non-jurisdictional area, which is why you were never brought into this conversation. But I am aware that a peer review has been, a PO is for that, and
we have 3 people on the commission who are experts too. And we feel that we could go on and talk with him and see for our own. We're the ones that are being crucified, questioned, and everything, why this is going on. I think with our blessings, that would relieve everything. But for some reason, we haven't been asked, and we haven't been allowed on the lot. And I find that very, very suspicious. And I know you're dealing with the law department, the recreation department, and everything else. But I'm asking you, would you allow this commission to come on to the location and look at it? like I said, we may say, yeah, there's nothing, we'll walk away. Or we may say something else. Is that what you're afraid of?
Mr. Shamil is an expert in this field and it was never deemed jurisdictional, so I would not invite you to all of our construction projects.
We
just
don't want to go
because-
to we only want to go to this construction project.
And I would need to have just cause for have you to come on site. I know there is a
Because
peer
because
process
there
and
were
process, and I'm
multiple-
happy to
There
comply.
were multiple residents in Waltham questioning it. And we have been called, I've been called personally along with the board to say what's going on, what is the commission doing? And our answer is call the law department and speak to the rec department. We've been called by the newspaper, we've been called by GBH to do this. There are other people looking at this project. And if you allow us to go on the project and allow us to do our job as a commissioner of conservation, it might be easier all around for everybody. But for some reason, we're questioning why we weren't allowed. The Fernald School is loaded with water, and we have gone to many projects on there. And the chairman of this board, before he stepped down, is convinced there was wetlands there based on what is in our maps and everything. And I don't know why we're being refused. You're not allowing. We're not questioning this, his authority, his expertise, or anything else. We're questioning our job, and we've been avoiding. We've been told we can't go on the property.
I believe we've asked for a peer review. Steve, we're not questioning your expertise at all. I believe we've asked for a peer review. Yes. I believe Kim has said that they would comply with the peer review. I think that satisfies it. As far as me, I'm not going to speak for all the commissioners, but if a peer reviewer was allowed to go on and base his opinion or her opinion on what they find, that would solve a lot of the questions coming through us as far as, is this a wetland or not?
So this seems to go back to this, there was this contentious email thread, and then Mrs. Champion, who's the newest member of the commission in the March meeting, she actually told Mr. Mosier she thought he needed to apologize to the recreation director for the tone of his emails. And she said that, she was previously a staff member to the commission for many years, although she's new and so she said there had always been a good relationship between the city and the commission. And Mr. Mosier admitted that maybe he didn't handle it perfectly. He wasn't sure if he handled it well, but he didn't apologize. But he did say, I think that I try to treat the city the same way I would treat a private developer. So that seems to be sort of a key issue here, is what level of accommodation should the Conservation Commission be doing for the city, and what level of niceness should there be in these conversations? So I believe, if I understand correctly, the Conservation Commission could try to do a cease and desist order on them now. They could try to get them to stop work now, but they're not doing that. Seems that most of the members of the commission kind of want to reestablish a collegial relationship between themselves and the city department. So I was kind of surprised then by the recreation director's tone and saying, no, you can't go on the site. It's kind of like, if that collegial relationship is broken, whose job is it to fix it,
So it goes only one way.
Yeah,
especially
exactly.
considering
How
I can kind of appreciate why Phil would be annoyed that they're just ignoring the Conservation Commission, not even giving them the formality of voting on the thing, whether or not it's a wetland.
Yeah, and it seems like, there are people or maybe of the impression that Phil is just generally against the project and is looking for an excuse, which doesn't really make sense to me, because I don't know why he would be against it if it weren't for conservation reasons.
What's funny is that that's a very zero-sum attitude to have, and that's one that I've seen replicated throughout the city. And it's ironic because I think in the traffic commission meeting, Joe Vizard was complaining that a lot of other people outside the city government have a zero-sum view of things. So it was interesting to see this play out in terms of one city department has to be showing deference to another city department unconditionally, apparently.
Yeah, so and that's and also there seems to be different, if if somebody, a lot of people, if somebody has expertise and then somebody asks you to be on a board, they kind of assume that they want my expertise so I can be there to point out possible problems. But then when they point out possible problems, it seems like there are people who take that not as I'm trying to help present a problem, it's I'm making an excuse because of something personal, either I don't like you or I don't like your project or something. And that's too bad. Like there are boards in town that are supposed to regulate things, and they should be able to regulate without people taking it personally. That being said, I didn't read all these emails, so I don't know exactly the tone. But I wanted to show, so what's at issue is there is a stream on the property that is a drainage ditch. So this is the stream, and it's almost certainly a man-made drainage ditch, but a drainage ditch can be considered a stream legally if has water in it year-round, or if it has water in it only part of the year, but it connects to wetlands. So what's really at question is, does this connect to wetlands? Where does this water go? Does it seep down after the rain into the water table? And the water table is out of the Conservation Commission's jurisdiction, by the way. I learned that today. They're responsible for water above the earth. But if this then goes temporarily underground and then comes out in a wetland, then that's definitely jurisdictional. So that's kind of the technical issue involved here. And then the other thing that was kind of odd about the whole thing is the recreation director said several times, she referenced that the consultant was an expert in his field, and that's why it wasn't necessary for the commission to second guess it. And so, but she never mentioned what his qualifications were. So I got a copy of the report in part because I assumed it would say that if you're speaking as an expert, you usually start off by saying, what are your qualifications as an expert? And not only does it not say that, but I couldn't find a website for him. He doesn't have a LinkedIn page. There was nothing online that said his qualifications, which is odd because usually if someone has a master's or a PhD in a science field, you can find some reference to that either on the internet or on ProQuest. I checked on ProQuest too, either they have a thesis which is referenced somewhere, or you find their CV that says where they went to school. So the fact that he is working as a consultant and doesn't have a website, and the fact that he's an expert and doesn't have anything online to show his expertise, I thought was odd. It doesn't necessarily mean anything bad, but I definitely thought it was odd because they were referencing his expertise so much. And if he doesn't have a website and he's a freelancer, presumably he's getting jobs by word of mouth. When I looked him up, I did find lots of records from other cities and towns where he also served as a consultant. But if he's getting jobs by word of mouth and he's being hired by the developer, not by the city, it kind of raises the question of, is he getting, are people recommending him because he's likely to say what the developer wants him to say? I don't know enough about him to allege that, but I think there's a lot of questions raised about his expertise. So the recreation director did agree to let the peer reviewer onto the site. However, it was mentioned in the meeting that the Conservation Commission had submitted a PO, a purchase order for that, and it hadn't been approved by the city yet. I don't know if it has been. It's not up on the RFP website, but I don't know, maybe it doesn't need to go up there because it's a short-term contractor. I'm not sure. But so the thing is, somebody in City Hall still has control of the timetable over when this determination is going to be made about is this a wetland or not. And meanwhile, the work continues.
They're not going to stop the work. They're gonna slow walk the approval clearly there, and I've not seen any kind of rush for that one. So.
I asked my dad about this. My dad has been on 3 different conservation commissions in Massachusetts, so he's a good source of perspective. And he said, well, although conservation commissions have some pretty strong enforcement actions they can do in theory, in order to really do those, they need support from other city departments and city officials. And so for a conservation commission to enforce against the recreation department would be very difficult if it's not supported by the mayor or, influential city councilors. He gave an example that I guess in Ipswich once, there was a landowner who wouldn't allow them on the property. And once you've filed a notice of intent, then it's illegal to deny the Conservation Commission access to the property. It's not clear if that applies to the Waltham case because they never filed a notice of intent. But in this case in Ipswich, he had a legal right to go on the property and the homeowner said no. So he got the police chief and the police chief walked him onto the property. So you have to have you have to have other people in the city government who have your back in order to actually enforce these things. So this will be interesting to see what happens in the Conservation Commission with this. So then the other thing that happened recently is the site visit. So on as you probably know, because we've discussed it before, the city has posted RFPs, requests for proposal for 5 of the buildings on the Fernald site. I have here's what they're being used for, and each one calls for it to be used for a specific use, which is either a specific type of housing, or in one case, adult daycare, and in one case, veteran services. And then it says that the rent would be nominal. It doesn't say exactly what, and then the lessee would be responsible for rehabbing the building. And then they would have a lease term of 10 to 30 years to make that back. So those have been up since February, and there were site visits for potential bidders, excuse me, scheduled for April 10th and April 17th. And the April 10th one was postponed. That was supposed to be for half the buildings, and they postponed it and said, we'll do all the buildings on April 17th. So those site visits are intended for potential bidders, but they are open to the public. And so a few of the people involved in the People's Fernald group were sending out emails telling residents they might want to attend because this is a very rare opportunity to see what's actually going on that property. So what happened was on April 17th, about 30 people showed up that morning, including Jamie. So you might have some to add about what happened.
Yeah, I was one of the first people there.
Yeah. So how did you find out that it was canceled initially?
So basically it was when nobody other than Tom Stanley and Colleen showed up was kind of what made it clear that it was canceled. Eventually, like, there was a big enough crowd of people hanging out there that someone must have told the cops that there were a bunch of people trying to get into the Fernald, because first there was like just one cop showing up, and then he called his like a few other people, and actually it ended up being Gloria Champion's son, I believe, that was one of the last ones that sort of helped resolve the situation and called the purchasing agent's office and informed us that, oh, by the way, it was canceled shortly after the other one was canceled.
So an official city event with 2 city councilors there had to be essentially broken up by police because it was canceled. So the question is, who did they tell it was canceled, and when did they tell them? And so if you go to the city RFP site, there's the RFP, and then on each one there's an addendum 2, that's the postponement from the 10th. And then there was an addendum 3, which said it was canceled, and said that potential bidders can look at pictures of the site on the website instead. There's no rescheduled site visit. They can go look at pictures, which are a few years old. And this is the addendum 3, and it's dated April 11th, which would mean that they canceled this the day after they postponed it from April 10th to April 17th, which is odd.
I think also several people that were on supposed to be on the email list for the interested buyers didn't get any notification.
Yes, exactly. So I don't believe this was on the site April 11th because I checked it more recently, but I didn't screenshot or anything, so I don't have proof. Tom, who's a member of our team, put himself on the email list to get these notifications by email, and he in fact did get a notification about the postponement. That's how we knew about it. So he wrote to the purchasing department to say, why didn't I get this? And they basically said they can't explain why he didn't get it. If he got the last one, he should have got this. They forwarded him the email, but apparently it doesn't actually, as kind of like proof that they sent it, but it doesn't prove anything, because apparently what they do is put all the potential bidders in BCC, which kind of makes sense because you don't want the potential bidders to see each other. That makes sense, but it's a weird way to do it because they're required by law to make sure that everyone gets the same info. That's a big part of their job. So how do you prove you gave everyone the same info if you can't prove that something was sent to a specific person on a specific date? And in fact, they couldn't explain why Tom didn't get it. And they couldn't exactly prove it was sent to him because if it was, he was in BCC. So it says, it seems like the simplest answer is that they didn't send it. But the person in the purchasing office, Ms. Philpott, the purchasing agent, said that she's sure that some people got it because they got 3 responses on Friday the 11th and Tuesday the 12th from interested parties. So if you had at least 4 interested parties, why did you cancel it? That just raises more questions about why it was canceled last minute. So this was kind of a bizarre thing. And it seems pretty clear that, so both the purchasing office and the recreation department report to Mayor McCarthy, and it seems like Mayor McCarthy does not want people on the site, or she doesn't want anyone on the site who could possibly be critical. And so this is interesting for a couple reasons, partly because, so if you look at these RFPs, what my reaction to them, and I have to give the disclaimer that I know very little about commercial real estate, so there could be big things I'm missing here. But it seems to me that these are not a good deal because these are services that are usually provided either by a state agency or a nonprofit, because they're not easy services to make a profit on. There are some for-profit developers who do affordable housing, but they do like huge developments. They don't buy a historical property and then rehab it into a few units of affordable housing, as far as I know. So if you worked for a state agency or a nonprofit, and you would have to go to your board or your donors or a grant maker and say, so listen, I need a couple $1 million. I know it's in the millions, but I don't know exactly how much it is because it's hard to tell how much it's really going to cost to rehab this building because we haven't even seen it. We've only seen pictures of it. And there are articles in the Globe about what lousy shape the buildings are in. So I need a hard to determine amount of money to provide these services and then try to make that money back in 10 to 30 years.
There are also like a few gotchas in there too. Like I believe like sewer and water and stuff would have to get paid for to get it brought out to those buildings and stuff because all that stuff has to get redone. So it's like not only would the person be or the whatever entity comes in to run this thing would be on the hook for quite a lot of money without having any real vested interest in the property. So
yeah, that was my impression too. There's running those lines, and then there could be other things that aren't in the RFP because this is a very unique property with a very strange history that not everybody knows. And it's the fact that you could start developing something and then have these extra expenses coming up. That's really hard for a nonprofit or a board to handle, especially when they could buy a normal building or lease a normal building and do this and have it be much more predictable, the costs involved and whether they can make it back in the time. So for me, this made me wonder, is this serious? Does the city really expect people to bid on these? Or is this just so that the mayor can say she's working on these things? And part of the reason I say that is after the citizen input session, Councillor Hanley did a Facebook post where he tried to sort of clarify some things, some misinformation. In the citizen input session, there were some people who were mad about things that weren't happening, or mad that certain things weren't happening that maybe actually are happening. There was a lot of misinformation because it's been very hard to find accurate information on this, as I've talked about a lot. So Councillor Hanley did a post where he tried to clarify some things, and he said affordable housing is being worked on, or he said there's some movement towards affordable housing. So there's 2 things he could be referring to there. One is there is 2 buildings, which I think will be, one of which has already been rehabbed, and I think another one will be, and I believe that's going to total 4 units of affordable housing that's already in the works. It also may be referring to these RFPs. So Councillor Hanley was correct. He wasn't lying when he said there was movement towards it, but it's pretty misleading in the sense that we don't know, is this really going to happen? The other thing's already happening, that's only 4 units. So I know it sounds very cynical to say, but I think because of this, what happened with this site visit, I think what's going on here is the mayor just wants to be able to say that she tried to use the buildings for these things, nobody bid, and the next step will be to demolish them. And, you know, if it's very hard, you know, there are some people who see it and see that right away, and there are other people who find it very hard to believe that the mayor would do that. But I really think that that's what's going on here.
What it is it seems like it's acting in bad faith, and it's hard to take it that people are acting in bad faith so obviously, like, but like this is a terrible deal.
Yeah.
I don't understand how anyone could think this is real. I mean, like, if there are people that are willing to take it, okay, I'll believe when I see it, I guess.
I mean, it's similar to what appeared to be going on with the farm, where she says, I want the farm to stay, but she offered them something that was not a good deal for them. And that it seemed like maybe she just didn't want them to take it, but she didn't want to take responsibility for kicking them out. And that might have been something that happened with Healthy Waltham too, where there was a building that was sort of not offered to them, but they were expected to bid on it. And it wasn't necessarily a good deal for them, but officially what's on paper is that they decided not to do it. And in this case, what will be on paper is nobody bid on it. Just like with the Armory project a few years ago, what's on paper is that the nonprofit that proposed it changed their mind, which is technically true, but there was a lot of stuff that happened to make them change their mind. Frustrating to know, you know, what is her intentions versus what is her real intentions versus what is the thing she has to say publicly to appease someone. So another thing that came up a lot at the input session was people kept saying there's no master plan, which is kind of true. There isn't a master plan that looks like what you'd expect it to look like with like a map of the whole site. There is a document from 2017 that was a memo the mayor sent to the city council where she kind of laid out her plans for the whole site. And some of the things she said have happened. She wanted to give some of the land to the cemetery department for a cemetery. That has been approved by the council, so that's happening. Some have not yet happened. And then one thing that was on there was a museum. And as far as I know, the mayor, there's never, other than Alex Green's class making their own museum exhibit and promoting this, there's never been any movement towards that. And I find it really difficult to believe that in 2017, she believed there was going to be a museum, because we've heard nothing about it since then. And so it really seems like she put that on there to appease the people who wanted the museum, and she knew it wouldn't work out. And there's a million reasons it might not work out. That wouldn't be her fault. Like, nobody wants to fund it, right? But it's like, you know, it happens a lot, because when you talk to people who are new to Waltham politics and you talk about transparency issues, then they say, well, actually, you know, I read this thing where the mayor actually said exactly what she wanted to do, but we never know if that's really what she wants, right? So that's what's going on with the Fernald. She clearly doesn't want anyone on the site. It's interesting also because it seems like Councillor Hanley, who I know has a good relationship with her, but he seemed to hear the message that transparency was an issue and there was misinformation. He actually put a lot of work into making his own website about it. So now there's at least 4 websites about the Fernald. I think the council maybe is seeing that part of the problem here is information, that there are a lot of people mad about stuff that's not happening, or a lot of people mad about things that maybe they wouldn't be mad about if they heard about it earlier. But it seems like the mayor is going the opposite direction. She's trying to limit who can be on the site. She's trying to limit the information that's out there. And that has served her in the past. She's done that before and she got reelected. But the difference with the Fernald thing is there could be state agencies getting involved, and at least one federal agency is investigating the mishandling of records. So whether it's going to work for her this time, or whether the Fernald will be, you know, the project where that approach of trying to tightly control information and conversations finally backfires on her.
And it's worth noting that, like, the city council is largely complicit in this. Like, that Sean Durkee basically said explicitly that he views his role as like doing whatever the mayor wants on this because she got reelected.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
which is
so,
a very fascinating way to view democracy, but it's fine.
Yeah,
Like,
that's the thing, is there are a lot of people in town. I actually had a conversation. I was at a friend's house this weekend and met a guy who's lived in Waltham his whole life, and really nice guy, but a lot of people who've been here for a long time, they really trust the mayor and they believe she wants what they want, so they want her to be powerful. which kind of makes sense. If somebody wants the same things you want them to have power and get it done. But at what point do you give up on believing in democracy? At what point do you give up on believing that we have all these boards? What's the point of these boards if all they do is do what the mayor wants them to do? Why even have them, you know?
And the way that open meeting or whatever is to do the thing that's like literally the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy like joke of posting stuff in the bottom of like a locked filing cabinet in a locked bathroom, and only basically the equivalent of what the boards of truth feel like, to be honest, especially like with some of those meetings. And considering like the way that they did like the public notification for the Fernald, but then say, oh, there was public notification, and it's like, oh, good, you did the 300 feet bordering the enormous property. Like certainly the rest of the city wouldn't be that interested in something as consequential as that, but I guess you put it in the newspaper, so that's fine. Like,
yeah, and do they, how do you, that's another thing I should mention. So are there potential bidders? According to several people who were there, they said they talked to people who identified themselves as bidders, but I haven't been able to find out who they were or verify that. So it seemed like there were potential bidders. So what are they going to think after this, that how you're going to spend years collaborating with a city that wouldn't even show up to the site visit and told you to look at pictures instead? Like, I don't see, I'd be very interested to know if there are any real serious bidders. I'd love to hear their
that
take
also does
on
kind of raise the
pros and
question of
cons.
if the serious bidders were showing up to the site visit, that the email that ostensibly went out that Tom didn't get. I
Yeah.
guess maybe they didn't actually get this. This is a very weird.
Right. If they were there, then they must have not. So, clearly the message did not get out to the people who needed it. So, and I don't think, I'm not trying to blame the staff for it. It seems like they have a reasonable system, not an ideal system, but a reasonable system. It really seemed like somebody said, and probably the mayor, because I don't know who else would be able to do that, but someone told them at the last minute to cancel it, and they knew it was going to be problematic. I don't understand how they're saying they posted the cancellation on April 11th, the day after they posted the postponement. And even if that's true, that raises questions, because that means they postponed it and someone else told them to cancel it instead. So the whole situation is just like really weird, and I don't think it's a snafu by staff members. I think there was somebody with power was calling the shots, and I think it was the mayor, because it kind of fits her MO.
One of the consequences of having a powerful executive is that the buck stops with them, and you can't really dodge responsibility by blaming your staff.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is like we're showing like we talked about actually staff a lot in this debrief between the Conservation Commission and this, and that's never really, as I see it, that's never really truly where the problems are. The problems come from the top. The ones that we talk about on this show come from the top, at least.
Yeah, it's very rarely they have any issue with any of the people that are actually working in city hall. It's just like, well, I'm gonna have some clips to show on the other ones. We can get into that now.
Yeah, well, that's all I have on Fernald. So
Yeah.
if you want to go ahead with your part.
Yeah. Hi everyone, this is editing Jamie. I saw that we were getting close to an hour on the debrief, so I made the executive decision to split the parking and housing discussion into a separate segment, which will be coming soon. That's the debrief for April. Thank you everyone, and have a good night. Bye-bye.
Thank you.